traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. Naturally enough, in Australia, that's our Indigenous population, and I would probably say something in one of our Aboriginal languages to make that welcome. But today, I'd just like to simply say thank you to our friends in Thailand, particularly the beautiful addresses we've had this morning. Thank you for your welcome for us as delegates to this conference. And we would also acknowledge the people who are in the room for their capability. Thank you, all of the adult and grown-up presenters, for what you're going to bring. And thank you so much for the emerging leaders, those who I think are wearing yellow lanyards predominantly. Thank you for your contribution as well. So, Anatai has given us the most incredibly enticing program of events for this conference. Music matters. I think nearly all of us who are speaking are trying to make a play on what those initial words were going to be. So I couldn't help myself but to also entitle my presentation A Matter of Music. It's such a delightful concept because it means I can roam anywhere, and I believe I'm going to do that. So the very first thing is that I'd like to ask you a question. What was your earliest musical memory? Just think about that. The very earliest one that you have. Okay, so now with the people that are around you, I want you to break into convenient groups of 2 or 3 or 4 and to tell those people what your earliest musical memory is. At the end of this, being a good teacher, I'm telling you what we're going to do. I'm going to randomly ask people in the audience what your new friend's musical memory is. Okay, so there's a task. Off you go. Okay, so the hubbub is dying down just a little bit, which means you must have paid attention to the task, or perhaps some other things as well. So my first musical memory is there was this very large piece of dark wood furniture at home, and it had this magical capacity that when you stood at one end and you lifted your arm up as high as your arm could possibly go, there were just like this tiny little thin white row that went above your head like that. And you could go tinker, 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 tinker with your fingers on the top, and you could make it sound like fairies in the garden. And then you could walk all the way down to the other end of this marvellous piece of furniture and do the same thing with your other hand, and it could sound like grumbly thunder. It was so exciting. I didn't know whether I liked the fairies or the thunder better, but I was so pleased when I actually grew tall enough that I could see over the top of this amazing piece of furniture to discover this wonderful row of white teeth that I thought they were. And I do remember drawing flowers on the white teeth with a pen that I found because the fairies would like it, therefore disfiguring my mother's Steinway piano forever. So that's my first musical memory, the fairies in the garden. Because I know that there's my roving microphone in my hand, I'm just going to now come up to the back and ask for your earliest memories, well, actually the person sitting beside you. Because you're on your phone? Oh, okay, he wasn't paying attention. Here we go.
I have just asked him, so this is Ajahn Prusit from the Songkhla Ratchapat University. The musical memory is he played the melodian or melodica. So that time he very exciting to making music with his friends at that time. So and enjoyable, of course.
I have a feeling if I spoke to my own children and told them about your experience with the melodica, they might not even know what that instrument was anymore. So thank you for that memory. That's excellent. Yours, your friend's. What was his? No. Tell me about your friend's musical memory. Quick.
Morning, huh? He first the music marching band. That morning. That morning.
Playing in a marching band.
7th grade.
Play the marching band. 7th grade.
Okay. Thank you. 7th grade marching band, first musical experience. And for you?
My earliest,
First music memory.
when I was baby, my mother tap and sing to me.
Yes. So a musical memory where a mother is tapping and singing, which is very good.
So when I was in kindergarten and I just walking on the street and I saw a violinist, he's played the violin and I just think, wow, that's amazing. Yeah.
That's lovely. And you?
What, my own?
Yeah.
Similar to over there, just being sung to as an infant by my parents, I guess. Yeah.
I also liked eating the white paint that was on the crib that I was in. It was totally delicious. It was totally delicious because it was made of lead, and that accounts for me now, I think.
Oh, okay. So from my group, we are all from the Philippines, and our earliest musical memories are the lullabies from our parents. Yeah, so we both have the same lullaby because we are from the same province, and he has a custom-made lullaby by his parents that she made her own tune for it. And
Can you sing your lullaby?
okay, so it sounds like this. Sorry.
We're all musicians. We're all going to judge you. Yeah.
Okay. Idili tulog anay wala diri imunanay kadto jenda bakal papay ili tulog anay.
Thank you. Now, your mother's free composition.
It's not really a free composition. It's from I don't know if you know this. It's from a children's book entitled "I Love You Forever." She made her own tune, I think, if I remember correctly. It goes like, I love you forever. I like you for always. As long as I'm living, my baby you'll be.
Yes, my 32-year-old son doesn't really like it when I call him my baby in front of all of his friends, but, you know, that's who he is. Okay. Your friends.
My friend told me his first musical experience was when his grandmother gave him a toy drum at the age of 3, and he was running through the garden crazy, playing it for hours.
I'm so pleased about that because I took great joy in delivering noisy musical presents to all of my friends when they had babies, and they really hated me for that, but it was very good.
Well, since I studied in a Catholic school in Bangkok, and my first musical memory was when all the teacher nuns were singing in the church. We have a church in the school, and we had to attend the church every other day.
Thank you very much. Now, what we have is a whole range of different forms of musical experiences. Thank you. And the most delightful thing about these range of experiences is they actually tell us a little bit about who we are as people and how it is we react with the world around us. For some people, their first experience is in the band at school. That's great. Some families are just not musical families, and we kind of forget that when we come from families that their experience is limited. So schools have an important role to be able to show people what music can be and to open up students' ideas to what music means for them and for society. The same way that schools have a responsibility for teaching mathematics and history and social thinking and chemistry and all of those things, music is one of those things that makes us people. Many of you have had experiences of learning music as little ones or listening to it from your parents, predominantly mothers, because they do a lot of the cuddling and quietening of tragic babies. And what's really lovely there is that you get a marvellous picture that you carry with you forever and forever and forever of the place that you held inside a family, but also the songs that have transported themselves through time to your mother's lips. And then you in turn produce that for your next brood of children. So there's a very, very cultural relationship with the songs of the young and for youth and playing with little people that shows us what importance our own national culture might happen to have. So we start thinking about music and why music is important without even really knowing it. We start doing it with breath. For me, not only did I like the fairies at one end of the piano and the big storms that you could have at the other end of the piano, I really, really liked the wood grain of the piano. I could sit there for hours stroking the grain of the piano. And so naturally enough, I asked my parents when I was about 3 and just starting school if I could start to learn to play the piano. Well, with this introduction, you would expect a prodigy, wouldn't you, to have emerged? I must have been the slowest piano student ever. I was given a book which happily had fairies in it, and I stayed on this book, teaching little fingers to play, it was called, for at least 3 years until I was 6. And the problem was that even at 3, my very first day of having the book, I'd played my way through it. But I couldn't communicate that at 3 to my teacher, so we did it page by page and repeated it page by page on the school piano, which was horrid. And so I had a complete disassociation with what I did formally in my music studies and what I did at home when I was just allowed to make up songs for fairies. I didn't know I was composing. I was just making up songs for fairies. And then when I was 12, having had spectacularly zero progress on the piano, really, it was embarrassing how low my skills were at that stage, my mother happily said, well, now that you're old enough, you can start a new instrument. What would it like to be? I chose the cello. I'd never seen a cello. I like the sound of the word, and my grandfather had given me a record that had Prince Cello heading out to find his perfect wife. I think Bing Crosby sang it. I really don't know. Prince Cello found Celeste. So that was my relationship with the cello. And so over the school's PA system came does anybody have a cello? And sure enough, somebody did. And then my mother brought home this enormous brown package. And we opened up the rusty zip around it, and inside it was honestly the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life. And my mother said, "Okay, Anna, play it." And I just looked at it, unable to play totally, and just found myself stroking the wood the same way that I did stroke the wood on the piano itself. So finally I got it out and tuned it. It was remarkable because it said, it came with a book, that really basic one. It doesn't matter, but it told you the tuning of the strings. A tune a day it was. It came with the tunings of the strings, and I thought, oh, maybe the piano can help. And I went across and I dinged the piano and tuned the string up. Then when I went to my first lesson, the teacher said, well, here are the strings. I said, yeah, I know, that's this, this, and this, and this. I tuned them. Really? Yeah. But I'd also had a tune a day, so I couldn't help myself. Like my first piano lesson, I'd played my way through the book before I had my first lesson. This is probably a story that many of you musicians have, that if you're going to be a musician, you kind of know it, and you make those connections as soon as you can. So what I discovered was that I really loved the cello. I liked its sound, I liked the way it looked, I liked the way it smelled. I liked the smell of the rosin, the way that it would rumble through my body when I played it, particularly the low notes, when it was in tune, how nice the things all, the harmonic resonances moved together. I really, really liked that. And I liked my brother's clarinet until I was told I wasn't allowed to play that because it was his and not mine. Because I was treating it the same way. And when I finally got to school, the band experience, boy, was that illuminating. My high school suddenly had all of these instruments, trombones and oboes and drums and percussion and violins and violas, instruments I'd never seen before. And all of a sudden, every single one of them became a jewel in my eye. I've got to have that, I've got to play it. Then the most remarkable thing happened. I suddenly started distinguishing between the musics that I was listening to, because it just used to be what was in the book, and then people would bring new pieces, and I'd be a part of an ensemble playing other stuff. So I was being able to differentiate my line between the other lines, and also the music that was really old, traditional British folk tunes, to snippets of Beethoven slow movements of symphonies, to just like a little bit of Korean music. We had some Arirang happening. We just roamed around the world. And all of a sudden, I was beginning to think that music was more than just my wonderful feeling of the instrument, but something that actually connected me to people of which I knew nothing. Now, you've got to understand that growing up in Australia, where I grew up, everybody was white. We all spoke English and nothing else happened. I remember being so totally surprised when my father took me to Fiji when I was 5 and we met people who spoke a different language and looked totally different. Could have floored me. Had no idea that was the case. No idea at all. But now, of course, Australia isn't like that at all. Australia is a country where we have 150 different nations at least represented. And so our musical world is very rich and very, very diverse. And I think that's quite lovely. So now I'm going to go and start my talk, maybe. The image that you have up there is, well, tell me what you think about this particular person. What would you know from looking at him? Somebody be very brave and shout. He's a boy. So he's playing a guitar. Dieter, what did you say? Oh, playing guitar. Yeah, he's a black guy. Anything else? Groovy haircut. Yeah, he's smiling a little bit. Got a lot of spotlights on him. Clearly he's having a big moment. So this young fellow, of course, looks like a guitarist, but he's actually one of my best piano students. And he has an alternate life as a gigging musician on a stage with lights and young people screaming and shrieking at him, which is where he was heading off to in this one. And the second half of his life is he's one of Australia's best young pianists winning piano competitions, fabulous. But whenever I see him, he's playing something different. And it's always with a different group of people. The music comes from different places. And what he is a very eclectic musician. I think he's typical of a musician of the 21st century in that he doesn't limit his palette to one particular sound. He actually quite enjoys a much, much broader sound world. So he's as likely to play his guitar as to sit there and mix and put things up onto SoundCloud or to do an EDM. He's as likely to do that as he is to be practicing Rachmaninoff. So I think he is the musician of the future. And for me, as a music educator, he is the person that I want to come out of my institution. Gone are the days, I think, where musicians can just study one thing. In other days, when being able to embrace a wide world of music is the thing that you need to do. Thank you for your help in identifying this young man. Next month, he's playing in the Australian Art Gallery. Come to Sydney to see it. Inside a piano, where there's been a circle cut in the piano. So he has to crawl under the piano and up inside, and he's playing backwards. So his right hand is playing in reverse what the left hand would be playing, and so on. And the middle range of the strings is missing because his body is in there, and it's really quite wild. The mental game that has to go on to do that is really very funny. So we as musicians are steeped in traditions. So this image is an image that represents my university. It's sandstone, it's ancient, it's got this old person standing in it in clothing that we don't wear anymore. You can see exactly what my university wants to exude in terms of its public domain. It wants to tell you that we are worthy, we are solid, we stand the test of time, we're very intelligent, come to our place. And I find that awkward. So this is my school. On the left, we couldn't be more traditional. That's a castle. A castle in Australia is really bizarre. Seeing as we only had buildings for less than 200 years. And it was one of the first buildings ever built in Australia, which is even more bizarre. You'd think you'd be building houses and things like that. But the British governor decided he needed to have a really great spot for his horses. So before he even built Government House, he built a stable, and this is the stable. It's quite astonishing, isn't it? So where the horses used to walk themselves around, that's now our theatre. Happily, 20 years ago, we refreshed ourselves, and the right-hand side of the building is our 21st century homage to music, full of steel and glass and really good acoustic panelling and useful things for the 21st century. We go down into the earth so that we don't disturb the landscape above it. And the most marvellous thing is that in making it, we also discovered our Indigenous heritage on that site, which had previously been lost. So we now know that on the very site of that building, the old stable, was where young men used to get initiated into dog and kangaroo dance. And that was very important because for Indigenous Australians, there was no written language. It was an oral sung repetition. And so all knowledge, like going to university, was singing a song. They didn't sing songs for the hell of it. They sang it because there was an important piece of knowledge that had to be passed around. And on that site, all of the local clans used to join and share their knowledge. They would have what they call corroboree on that site. So I feel totally groovy with that because it means that I can tell my students that what we're doing is living with a continuity of human thinking about music and the importance of music. So I can say knowledge is music, music is knowledge, and that's where we're heading today, about music being knowledge. One of the core ideas that I've researched for a long time, but is inherent in all of us, is the concepts of both this heritage and sustainability. Later in the talk, I'll deal a little bit more with this idea. But the point is that heritage is all the stuff that comes before us, keeping that alive and happening. So in my world, Western art music is the historical artefact. It's the heritage that binds European musicians together, and now, of course, enables musicians from Asia to appreciate the musics that have come out of European traditions. Because our world is so small, we share it now, we understand what's going on. Sustainability is somewhat different. Each era of us, each nation, has its heritage moments. We have the things that we want to keep alive because they tell us what our countries and how our people thought going past in time. Literature does the same thing, I think, being able to help us understand our past. But with sustainability, I don't mean keeping things the same. With sustainability, we're actually talking about moving our music forwards into the 21st century, taking with it all of the things that we have. So in our 21st century world, that pretty much means anything. You can find any music from anywhere just by searching the internet. You can use any device you like to hear that music. What is it then that as musicians helps make music distinctive, that enables us to be able to take what we would think as art music or fun music forwards together? All things to ponder. I noticed that many of the talks following this one, we're talking specifically about that, about what makes specific musics unique to a particular cultural group, and I think that's extremely important. We're also talking about what sort of musics embrace lots of different views, and some of our performances for this conference are going to be the same. So transforming what we do is important. Here, of course, is just a little image of such a transformation, trying to make a very strange stable into something that looks just a little bit nice. Of course, if you take a metaphor too far, you fall down. This is only the outside. You don't know what's going on the inside. But it helps us to rethink something that is old. And that is also the art of a musician, being able to take music that has been and to make it new and to make it different and make it interpretable for our generation. I would think that in 20 years somebody would look at this image and scoff because of the sorts of ways the image has been projected onto the building. They can. So one of the things that I think is extremely important when we're dealing with the concept of heritage and sustainability is what are the core messages that musicians today need to grapple with. And I've put what I think is probably the most important one for me up there, and that is ecological and environmental sustainability. People who are not musicians listen to it as a pleasurable activity, but there has to be more for us. And being able to speak to our friends and to speak to the world about the important conditions of the world through our music, I think is the most important thing we can do. For most of you, this is no new story, but I think it's one that as educators, the ones who are going to bring music to the next generations and the ones after, there has to be a purpose in music that is stronger than just a like it. And for me, this is the one. We look at the fabulous Estonian revolution, which was a singing revolution, not a gunshot, but they got what they needed just by singing people into submission. This is the story for this world. And so I think turning in Australia, particularly our thoughts to the problems of climate change, particularly my South Sea Islander friends are having that problem because their islands are literally sinking. How can we raise people's attention to the plights and dilemmas of this world? We can do that through music. So that's one of our challenges. We have concepts that you probably all know very well. The one of tangible cultural heritage is really interesting because it means that what we're trying to do is, like my castle, make sure the stuff, the matter of materials are kept for the next generations and the next generations and the next generations because they are quite distinctly unique for any particular area. So tangible cultural heritage in Australia could be Uluru or Ayers Rock. It's just a piece of land. It's a large rock. It's a 3-kilometre wide rock. It's a 0.5 kilometre high rock. It's just popped up in the earth. It's been there for millennia. But for the people who live in that area, it is of really strong cultural significance because it shows them how it was they were created. And so now it's a spot of spiritual significance that is a tangible thing that we can go and look at and we can touch. And of course, we have it here. We have tangible heritage in our drums and bells. These drums and bells, that drum which we hit strings with. We have these forms of tangible heritage that we know about as musicians, and things that are still yet to be invented. What is more difficult is the intangible side, which are the songs your mother sang you when you were a child. How do we collect those sorts of things? I think we're very lucky that we're actually in the 21st century because it's much easier now to collect those songs and tunes, because 100 years ago we had musicians, or actually 200 years ago, musicians traipsing around with manuscript paper trying to put down what it was that song was that I heard in that village when I went to have a drink. And then at the beginning of the last century, the 20th century, we discovered how to record things. And now even the stuff of those 100-year-old recordings is becoming the thing that we start investigating, how that was possible. So what has been intangible also now is strangely becoming quite tangible, things that we can start to play around with. But there are things that are very, very difficult to find still. So a lot of our attention, when we think about intangible heritage, is placed in predominantly minority groups in each area. Now, living in a city of 5 million, and many people live in cities that are much bigger than that, I wonder what's happening musically inside my own town as we get such a mix of cultures. What are people, how are they making music in their homes now? Who's recording that? What sort of music happens at when the local kids go camping? How do they play that? Who's recording that? What is going to be distinctly Sydney music from the 2020s? Who's going to look at that in 50 years' time and say, what is the flavour of my town? I don't know. I'm guessing people are going to start mining YouTube and Spotify and all of these things in the future, or whatever replaces that, to be able to understand those things. So I think as musicians we need to keep our eye on those intangible moments of music making so that we can, keep it, mark it, highlight it for the future, as insignificant as it might be. There we go, music education is the follow-on from this. On my profile there, you would have said that I'm involved in music advocacy, and in there I have a very particular story to tell, and that is that my own government has decided that in primary schools it's sufficient to study music for 20 hours a year, spread over the year, which means that, and it's also shared with dance and art, so 20 hours for any cultural activity, so that you can get more maths and science in, because that's, of course, what the world will need. But if we look back in time, the things that are known about any society is its art and its culture. And you know the health of any society because of its art and its culture. So my advocacy goes right down to the toddlers, to the primary schoolers, to the people who are working with them, the development of teachers who might be general teachers, their understanding of music practice, so they can at least start talking about music in a way that is intelligent with their young people. And of course, as modern research continues on its way, we do know that having a musical education means that everything else improves because it's a symbolic language. Because it means something emotionally that you can express in a different way. It means that people have communication skills that they might not just get by talking to each other. So music is able to be a bridge between maths, science, literature, each other, communication. I know I'm just telling everybody what they all know in this room, but it's surprising how few politicians know this. And that is, I think, the story for us, is to be able to take that political story forwards as musicians, that music is not just for musicians, it's for all of us. There we go, there's all the things that I was wanting to talk about. I'll go on. So, what really excites me about being a dean is this image. What I have here are two students on the left, happily they're together now. I think this quartet was the start of that. Two fabulous players. One of them is Spanish Australian heritage. The other one is an Asian Australian heritage going back to, many years. Let's go back. The two guys on the right, the red-headed one is very much taller now, and they're happily still together as well. Quartets are marvellous things to bring people together. But one of the things that's very interesting is how an early ensemble starts to work with each other. How do you get to know each other's music making? What can you bring to the music making? Now, hearing those guys play a Mendelssohn quartet is absolutely stunning, but when you go and hear them play tango the following night in a bar, it's also marvellous. So they know as a quartet that they have to be able to broach a whole heap of different musical genres in order to make a living. This group has been together for 3 years now, and they're taller, older, much more mature, travelling the world. But what was important was at the start, we had an opportunity to talk to them about the importance of being a micro-business, how to run it, how to make a career, but also the importance of what their role was as musicians for society. So there, in the discussion with those guys, we roamed against all these topics, who they were, their personal identity. We had the concept of who they were as family and what their family heritage brought to them. We had an idea of what they'd thought about in political terms. So how to make your life in the political environment in which you find yourself. What technologies could you use as a string quartet to be able to enhance your career, change things, motivate difference? And finally, how much guts do you have for music? Because music is one of those industries that is very, very hard. Because we have to be so very, very good and so very, very committed. And we have to work at it so much more in such much more focused way than, for instance, somebody wanting to study physics or business. Many jobs there that are obvious, not so obvious for musicians. Oh, I don't know why I've got that again. Something went very wrong with my thing. That's because I'm going the other way. Oops. Okay, so young people today are quite different from young people that have ever existed before. I thought somebody might laugh at that point because I was reading Plato last week, who was a Greek philosopher writing in 3,000 years ago. And he pretty much said, young people today, they're hopeless. They talk back all the time. They can't concentrate. They're confused by the new music. It was just like reading, an elderly person today talking about the youth of today. But what was even more interesting about this ancient writer was that he insisted that in order to be a well-rounded human being, you had to have at least 3 years playing the lyre and being educated on that. And so the first 3 years of your schooling was on rhetoric, how to speak. The second 3 years of your schooling was learning to play the lyre, in other words, how to be a person through music. Mind you, he also said no more than 3 years, because if you were more than 3 years, then you might get diverted to only doing that. You don't want to do that. You want to be able to be a statesman. But nevertheless, and that's where it was. I'm also very aware that when he was also speaking to educated young men. He wasn't speaking about slaves or women, which were the whole of the rest of the population. And there we have a story, because we have people in our own societies today that also are marginalised in their capacity to be able to be musicians and to undertake music. So this young guy in first year is a saxophone player, and he decided he'd like to be a symphonic conductor. As you know, if you're a saxophone player, you don't actually have much opportunity to play in an orchestra, but he's amazing. He's done it. As an undergraduate, he just decided and called all of his mates together, and I've decided as a director that every year there's going to be a group of young people like him and like his friends that need opportunities that I cannot give them as part of the regular curriculum. So I just say yes. The expense of yes. But yes is the word for directors. It's yes. So we've talked about that. And we've talked about that. This is probably the thing that I'd want to spend most time on, but I won't. But I will let you have this later. It's something we call the ASH model, which is the result of doing our research in heritage and sustainability and what it actually looks like to musicians. So I'll just read you the three things on the left-hand side about what it means. The first one is that we know it's important, the concept of heritage, but I'm going to do my bit, but we'll keep it a distance. The most integrated and interesting idea, however, is the justice one at the bottom, which is music is a social contract between the artist and the community. And that's probably where I'd want to leave my talk, I think, that as musicians, what we have is a social contract between us and the communities in which we live. In one sense, this is completely at odds with the curriculum that I offer in my own institution, which is focused on the individual's own development, the marvellous way in which they can play their instruments, the ensemble experiences that we have. But what the main aim of a musical education is to ensure that students go out knowing that what they have is nothing about them anymore, but all about the context in which they live. So it's a contract. If you're a musician, you have a contract with your community and the world to do the best you can. So we're running delightfully early, but that was 40 minutes. So now I'd really like to turn the conversation back to you all to perhaps talk about some of these ideas and perhaps some others. So thank you. It's always hard to be the first person. It really is. So I found it much easier if you talk to the person beside you and say, well, what did you think? What do you want to talk about? And then you'll be able to talk about something and tell us it was the person beside you's idea. It makes it easier. So have a quick chat to the person beside you. What are the questions you'd really like to ask? Yes, in the front.
Could you please expand a little bit on the ASH model that you mentioned? Because we'd like to know a little more about what that is about. Is it an educational?
Yes, it is. Let me go backwards then. Can I have your indulgence for 5 minutes to talk about the ASH model? Yeah, right. Okay. So this is the result of a survey that we sent out to 5,000 artists and musicians across Australia. As part of that survey, we asked them a lot about what heritage and sustainability meant to them. Then we gave those 5,000 responses. We analysed it using what we call a phenomenographic approach to research analysis. In phenomenography, what you try to do is look at the qualitatively different ways in which people experience something. So often qualitative researchers try to look at things that are similar. These guys say the same, these guys say the same, these guys say the same. Therefore it's important because more guys say this than those ones. With phenomenography, instead, what we're trying to do is to tease out the variation between ways of seeing and what are the essential characteristics. That's the research background to it. But what we found were two things that were quite interestingly different. I think this has got a little light, doesn't it? There we go. There we go. It's 21st century. Here, we saw that there were two ways that people experienced things. One was heritage and sustainability in the context of doing the artistic work. The second one was artistic work in the context of heritage and sustainability. They're quite different. One was about the values that they held. The other one was about the actions that people would take. And we could see in these 5,000 comments that some people would focus on the ideas that they had, and others would just simply tell us what they did in order to be able to understand what was going on. So you might have heard of this kind of thing in other areas, espoused practice and the real practice. So practice in theory and practice in action. And this follows this kind of model, I would suggest. So With the distance one, it's quite dramatically dreadful for artists to be thinking this way. I always promised myself I would never give I would never make a judgment, but I have. I think this is terrible. This is not what I want anybody to be thinking as an artist, and that is everybody else deals with that. I'm just going to do my little job. I don't need to worry about it. It's too big a concept. It's out there. Heritage is somebody will make a decision if that building is going to be a heritage listed building. It's not my problem. And when they think of, well, not that one, hang on. When they think of sustainability itself, it's actually in terms of maintaining their own artistic practice. So in another context, in another study, somebody describes sustainability as the ability to keep getting up in the morning. You know, I need to be interested enough in my job just so I can get up in the morning. That's it. And another one in another study said, well, I put out my garbage every night. That's ecological sustainability, but that was as far as it went. It didn't go to any other choices rather than doing what was normal. When we come down, we talk about artifacts. In this sense, the stuff of culture is already there embedded in the fabric of our society, and we use that in order to be able to create our own voice. I think this is a very much better way to think. So it might be that you're given a green stone, and you look at the green stone that came from a special spot in your country, and you're going to write the ode to green stone and feel inspired by whatever artifact it might be. And we do that quite a lot. People write about, you know, the wind rustling through the trees, or the sound of the water running, the beautiful village that I live in. We take our inspiration from stuff, and we write about that stuff. And then the final one in this is this one that I was speaking about, is the social contract, where we use music to be a vehicle for social justice, to be able to emancipate people. And there are very few musicians, I think, that actually get to this stage of thinking about what their music practice is for in those sorts of terms. To be able to create an artistic work that moves people along the lines of thinking about equality and justice in your society or for the world is a very, very much harder activity. But of course, people do it. So that's something to aspire to and to recognise. Now we're on again. The thing that is really intriguing about the other side is the actions taken. If we just go to the final one, I'll just read it because it's very hard to see. Artistic activity incorporates cultural heritage and sustainability as essential components. Artistic work is an expression of a particular view of the world, with the artist as the cultural guardian and a social critic. And that is the thinking artist, the thinking musician. What voice do I have? How can I inform myself? How can I actively take a part in music making for justice and sustainability? Yeah, thank you for that good question. You gave me another 5 minutes of my talk. I like that, yeah. Any other comments? Martin?
There was a slide about research, which you kind of quickly skipped. Maybe you want to kind of tell us a little bit about what you wanted to say there.
Yep. This slide is talking about two forms of research. The first is investigating how people experience music life living. For me, that's my natural world because I'm pretty much a music sociologist. And also I like materials, I do investigations of that. And what I look at there is, as I said before, the concepts of variation. But on the other hand, research goes a long way in a whole heap of other directions as well. So that slide was a precursor to the Ash model. But now let me talk about research in more generic terms as musicians. We can play music. We can investigate why we like a phrase, how we would like to play it one way. We can experiment. We can work out what we're trying to do. That's kind of like stage one. Being able to understand what you're doing and how you're playing it to your own lovely aesthetic. Stage two is investigating the place of that music, why the composer thought the way they thought, how much do you know about that? How much do you know about how other people might have performed it? What about the place of the performances that originally happened? Where were they? What were they intended to do? What action did the audience take as a result of that? Knowing all of that, how can I transform and understand the music that I'm making in order to place it into a different context from the one in which it was originally encountered? Then we can move a stage beyond that and say, instead of thinking about art-specific work in a specific spot at a particular time, we can be thinking about how that work would be situated amongst the whole variety of works in that particular time, in that particular space, in that particular era, and start investigating what that might mean for performance practice or for musicology practice, or for simply understanding the important things that were happening in a city at a particular time. So one of the things that I'm quite intrigued at the moment is the music that comes out of 16th century Mantua in Italy, which is a cusp of transfer between Renaissance and Baroque. But when you look at the music, it was pretty much written at a time when Mantova was being endlessly invaded by different people. And the city itself would either bring upon itself a view of itself as a willing bride to a conquering husband, or it could be a wanton woman prostituting herself to a husband that's going to come in anyway, or it can be a raped woman because the husband was not really a husband, just coming in to rape and terrorise. And the music sits alongside the artistic artefacts and the ways that people are actually entering the countryside, the garlands that they would put, the arches that they would make, the clothing that they would wear, the textiles that they would use. So looking at why things happened at a particular time is very, very important, because you can understand the sort of social world in which it sat. And looking between art forms is also an interesting thing. So in that pocket history of music research, I haven't really scratched the surface, but I would like to say that musicians today need to be researchers. It's not enough to play. It's really important to be able to understand where your music is coming from, where your new music is coming from, what you understand your compositional practice to be about and why, and it has to be a sustained practice. There are problems in this world that we can grapple with, and research is the way to grapple with it. What are your views, Martin? What are your views on research and music? What are your views on research and music? All right. Okay. Anything else? Great. Anatai. We can pass over to the next team, I think. Oh, yes, one in the front.
You talked a lot about how math takes away time from music, especially in primary school, and I think that's definitely true, especially the way math is approached in primary and secondary education. It's just not right. It's not good, really, and it's not really a good understanding of math either. But I do think that we need to be careful not to pit the arts against the STEM fields, because actually science is also very important for culture, and even the Greeks taught astronomy and math and everything. And I do believe that in a way science is art as well. So I really think what we need to focus on is more like economy majors, because they are the ones that take more of this art away from life, whereas science is very important and very in flux and very also in tune with music, actually.
I couldn't have put it better myself. When you're sometimes speaking, you make dichotomous remarks just for the fun of it. But I'm also a mathematician, and I understand the beauty of it. That's something I think is quite intriguing. In my own context, what I'm working towards is STEAM, to put the A into STEM. So whenever I talk up and I go to STEM conferences and start talking about STEAM, I deliberately do things like go to science conferences to be able to talk about the contribution of music to science. So I agree with you totally. One of the reasons for that is that Music has so many physical qualities. We know simply about vibration. Where would physics be without vibration? Where would music be without the concepts of physics? It holds us together worldwide about why it is we like particular sounds, because of the resonance or dissonance of the way that strings vibrate or air vibrates together. And if you don't understand science, you don't understand those things. So I couldn't agree with you more, but in my own context, I'm going to fight the fight. Yeah. Goody. Dieter, I think you're next. Oh no, Jonathan's on the way. Fabulous. Okay, Jonathan's talk, Friday afternoon, vibrations. Good vibrations. Yeah. All right, thank you everybody.